Hello and welcome to my presentation on the introduction to the Panamount Facebow. Well, what is an articulator? The average person might ask if that's someone that speaks well. Dentists often refer to them as mandibular movement simulators. I like to simply state that they're chewing simulators. What we're trying to do with an articulator is to simulate the way someone chews, which is a very dynamic three-dimensional movement that includes an opening, protrusive, lateral, and closing movement. It all starts with the hinge axis that McCullum and his group discovered in 1926, that basically there's an axis of rotation within the mandible. Yet most restorations are made on small disposable articulators where the axis is in line with the occlusal plane. And if you have an axis that's in line with the occlusal plane like point C, it's a pure vertical movement out of the fossa. Yet the patient rotates around a point A, which is a down and backward rotation. So you can see there's a big discrepancy between the patient and these small disposable articulators. So we know we need an articulator that more anatomically represents the axis of the patient. So when we get cast mounted in here, that the movements of the articulator will more simulate the patient's jaw movements. There's also a protrusive pathway, which deals with opening or incising movement. The condyle not only has the ability to rotate within the fossa, but also has the ability to translate downward and forward. And this downward forward movement is a discluding factor of the teeth. So we capture this information by taking a protrusive check bite with the patient biting edge to edge, which we can then program into the articulator at a later time. Plane of occlusion related to a plane of reference. We do have an axis of the patient and a third point of reference, usually orbitally, which is the lower border of the eye. Then we have steep plane of occlusion, we have flat planes of occlusion, and we have even reverse plane of occlusion situations. So we want to capture the axis of the patient as well as the plane of their occlusion related to a plane of reference. And we do this with a Facebow. The upper surface of the Facebow is your plane of reference, capturing the axis of the patient by using the ears, referencing 22 millimeters below nasion where the average border of the eye is, referencing the upper frame to orbitally. The bite fork is capturing the plane of occlusion, and then the clamps here are connecting the two planes together. And then we can transfer that information to the articulator that also has an axis orbital plane of reference in relationship to the patient's plane of occlusion. And if we have a steep plane of occlusion, I'd expect to see excellent disclusion in opening movement, but I'd expect to see poor disclusion in a protrusive movement because the steep occlusal plane is nearly the same as the angulation of the protrusive pathway. If we take the extreme opposite, a reverse occlusal plane, I expect to see excellent disclusion in a protrusive movement, but now I'd see poor disclusion in an opening movement based on this axis of rotation. So we want to have a fairly level plane of occlusion so we can get disclusion in opening movement, which leads up to the mesial inclines of the upper teeth, as well as disclusion in a protrusive movement, which is the distal inclines of the upper teeth. The procedures for the Panamount Facebow, we do have the Facebow, we have the nasion relator, we have the stem assembly and the bite fork, as well as a hex wrench. We go ahead and attach the nasion relator to the crossbar of the Facebow and tighten in place with the screw. We can then attach the stem assembly, which has a shorter end here with the letter A printed on top, which will correspond to the letter A on top of the crossbar here. We also want to make sure that the flat here on the stem assembly is related towards the screw here on the crossbar. Then we can go ahead and insert the vertical post into the crossbar and tighten in place using the screw. We want to make sure that double toggle clamp is loose as well as the single toggle clamp. We have the bite tabs, which is a red impression compound that's been put on a self-adhesive strip that we can peel right off the sheet of paper and stick that onto the bite fork and then incisor area and then one in each molar area. You can also see that there's a little mark here on the bite fork which will correspond to the patient's dental midline. We can temper this in hot tap water, and then we can come to the patient, getting an indentation of the upper teeth into the compound. At this point, we could use bite tabs on the bottom side of the bite fork to have the patient bite up to help hold that bite fork against the upper teeth, or we can put cotton rolls on either side to have the patient bite against the cotton rolls to help hold the bite fork against the upper teeth. Or we also have a bite fork stabilizer, which is a horseshoe-shaped sponge material that you can peel and stick into place to have the patient bite against to help hold that bite fork against the upper teeth, capturing the plane of occlusion of this patient. We can then come in with the Facebow where we loosen the large screw here in the front and we instruct the patient to put the earplugs in their ears, sort of like a stethoscope or maybe the earphones of their radio. And while they're doing this, we can go ahead and slide the double clamp over the bite fork stem here. And then once they get into their ears, we can go ahead and tighten the large screw here in the front. Now, most Facebow systems use only an orbital pointer, where you would measure either from nasion down, or you'd feel where the lower border of the eye is here and come over and put a spot on the nose, or they sometimes take a ruler measurement from the teeth and make a spot on the nose. And then we can raise and lower the front of the Facebow until the orbital pointer is at the same height as the spot on the nose. Then we can tighten the horizontal clamp here, which will help support the Facebow at that location. With the Panamount Facebow, we also have a nasion relator, which relates the upper surface of the Facebow 22 millimeters below nasion where the lower border or orbitale is. So we push the nasion relator in against the patient's nasion and tighten in place with the screw. We can then tighten both clamps very tightly, capturing the plane of occlusion to the plane of reference of the patient. So we now capture the plane of occlusion as it relates to the axis orbital plane of reference. We can then loosen the small screw here on the top, and then loosen the large screw here in the front, instruct the patient to retract the earplugs out of their ears, and open their mouth so we can remove the Facebow from the patient. We can then loosen the screw here on the crossbar to remove the bite fork assembly, which will be sent to the laboratory for mounting the upper cast to the articulator. The maxillary mounting procedures is we always want to set the incisal pin at 0. Then we can add a mounting plate to the upper frame. And then we replace the incisal table with our mounting fixture here on the lower frame of the articulator. And then we can add our bite fork support to the lower mounting plate. And then we add our bite fork assembly to the mounting fixture, tightening in place with the thumb screw here on the mounting fixture. At this point, we can raise the teeter-totter here of the bite fork support up underneath the bite fork and tighten in place with the screw. And then we also want to trim our models and score them so the plaster will adhere to it. Then we can go ahead and index the upper cast to the bite fork in the articulator. We can then close the upper frame to see how much plaster we need to mix to make a connection between the model and the upper mounting plate. We go ahead and mix plaster and add plaster to the upper mounting plate as well as to the upper cast. Then we swing the lower frame around until the incisal pin touches the mounting fixture, making a connection of the upper cast to the mounting plate. So we can now see we capture the plane of occlusion as it relates to the plane of reference, connecting that cast to the upper frame. We can then open the articulator and remove the upper cast so we can mix another batch of plaster to beef this up and smooth it out to make it look really nice for patient consultations. We can then re-index that to the upper frame of the articulator. Interocclusal records, you have two choices. Most dentists use M.I.P, which is maximum intercuspal position. This is where the patient bites their teeth together. And we do this with a soft pink wax that we heat up in the hot water and then have the patient bite all the way through until their teeth touch, and then we chill it with an air syringe. So we can see where the patient bit through, creating an M.I.P or maximum intercuspal position record. The other option you would have is to take a centric relation interocclusal record, which deals with condylar position. Here's where they use some type of anterior deprogrammer, which creates a fulcrum point here in the front with no interferences of the posterior teeth, allowing the condyle to rise upward and forward into the fossa. We do this with our Panabite tray using a lower compound jig and bite registration material capturing a centric relation record. When we go to mount the lower cast in the laboratory, we have a mandibular mounting stand here which helps support the articulator upside down. We have the upper cast in here where we'll add our centric relation record to the upper cast. Then we'll add our lower cast to the centric relation record. Then we can close the lower frame around until it touches the incisal pin to see how much plaster we need to make a connection of the lower cast to the mounting plate. Go ahead and mix the plaster and add plaster to the mounting plate as well as to the lower cast. We swing the lower frame around until the incisal pin touches the table, making a connection of the lower cast to the lower frame or mounting plate of the articulator. Some basic fundamental functional analysis records would be a Facebow registration capturing at least an arbitrary relationship to an axis of rotation, as well as the patient's plane of occlusion. Interocclusal records give us a centric relation position, or M.I.P would give us where the patient bites, and a protrusive pathway which we can program to the articulator at a later time. Mounted study cast on a curved path articulator for more accurate jaw simulation. Our mission is that we're dedicated to providing quality, innovative products and exceptional customer service to the dental profession since 1974. If you'd like more information, please contact us at the following address. And I want to thank you for your attention and have a great day.